everybody, Anne-Marie here, and today I'm back with another 3 embellishment tutorials. These are all using paper ephemera that I also used to build my junk journal from a couple weeks ago, so you can go back and check that video out if you're interested. But today we're going to be making embellishments that you could use anywhere. Scrapbooks, cards, junk journal, any way that you would like. I will show you cards at the end of each little embellishment tutorial. And also just a reminder that I still have a giveaway open. It's open through the 10th. And then I will post a reel on the 11th announcing the winners, etc., etc. So all that information is on the post that says giveaway in giant letters on my channel. So that was just from last week. So hopefully you can find that. And you'll also find 3 other embellishment tutorials there if you're interested in that sort of thing. All right, so here we go. First up was that fun ledger paper pad that I had found, and it's got green printing. So I really went for the green. You'll see on the card that I made with this. But first up, I trimmed all the margin off so that I could get my tag punch right up on the edge and punched tags out of every scrap that I thought looked interesting. So I really liked to incorporate like the numbers along the side and the months that were across the top. So I made sure that I had some of those. This is a pretty thin paper. So I also punched out tags from craft cardstock. So this is a double-sided tag, which means, you can use it as like in a pocket or dangling as is. So you can write on both sides if you're journaling. You can choose which side you use, that sort of thing. If you don't have a tag punch, tags are very simple shapes to cut. Essentially, it's a rectangle with the corners notched. So I just suggest either tracing one or make your own template and cut that out and trace around that so that your shape is consistent, because that really helps. Even with a tag punch, which perfectly replicated the shape every single time, things didn't necessarily line up perfectly every time because I'm human and this is a handmade tag, and so it's going to have some imperfections. So I also went around with my scissor blade and just kind of roughed up the edges a little bit. This is vintage paper, and these are handmade tags, so they're going to be a little rough, literally around the edges, and things aren't going to be perfect. But the scissors do, distressing that edge like that kind of helps smooth out any obvious misalignments and can catch some of that adhesive that might overlap or stick out on the edges. And just for good measure, I use my sandpaper too. But this is all optional. If you are comfortable, just punch your tags and be done. You don't have to make them thicker, and you don't have to make them double-sided, which would then avoid the layering problem. So now I got a little small decorative flourishy swirl and my Gold Brilliance ink, and I partially stamped that swirl on the front of each tag. There's a close-up. And that's just to add a little interest, a little embellishment to the front. Last but not least, I threaded some vintage crochet thread through. I did a double strand on each tag. And then I went to make my card, and I felt like it did need a little more green. So I swapped it with some green twine for my stash. And I don't know what I feel about it with the green background. I don't know. All right, next up is a piece of music from the piano book that's from the 60s, if you remember that. I pulled out a few ink pads in different shades of blue, and I pulled out some different frame stamps that I have. So I'm just going to stamp my frames all over. I felt like the music was very interesting to look at, so I definitely stamped some of that, but I also stamped a little bit over part of the illustration. And I also really loved the handwriting. I kind of wanted to preserve that. So I also did some stamps over where the instructor had written notes. Then I did a rough cut of each of those frames. So I just kind of chopped a square out. And then I went back to fussy cut around every single frame. I did pick frames that were rather simple because I knew I would be doing this. Of course, you have lots of options. You can use dies, you can use an electronic cutter, you might have a punch that works this way, whatever works for you. But I liked the stamp just because it added a little bit of color, and I played off of that with how I embellished these. So I went through my flower stash and I found a few flowers that coordinated or matched the ink that I had used. And recently I had bought a whole bunch of white paper flowers that I can then ink so that they perfectly match my project. For centers on my flower, I used something different depending on what the backing was. For example, those last two flowers, that's the frame that you'll see me use on today's card. I used decorative brads for those because they had an actual hole already punched in there. The others, I just used a flat back pearl. I had a bunch of those leaves left over from the lollipop flowers from last week, so I just added those here and made this cute little embellished spot. So those are the completed embellishments, and there is one on a card. I kept the card very simple. It's just a 49 Market background, and then I die cut the sentiment and inked it just a hair so that it matched my flowers. All right, next up is the sewing pattern paper packaging, sewing pattern packaging. Yeah, the package from the sewing pattern, the paper that I used last week to punch butterflies from. So now we're using the actual packaging. So there's two ways that I'm going to use this. First off, I'm going to cut off all the excess packaging around the ladies. We're leaving them there because they're super cute, and I'm going to fussy cut those later to use on things. And you'll see in my example card, I did not make a new card with these exact things, but I have made this embellishment before and used it on a card. So you still do get to see a finished card example using these. So after I trimmed those at about a 1/2 inch. And all you do is you fold them, you lay them down together, and then you run them through your sewing machine. I like to do it on the zigzag stitch setting. And I did trim it a little bit so that, because some of them went wonky, so I trimmed them just so they were a little straighter, but you know, I like the wonky. And then you can see here in the finished card, I have a strip of that sewing pattern packaging at the bottom. I'm using it kind of like ribbon or washi. And then I fussy cut a lady from the front, one of the fashion ladies from the front of the packaging to use on the card. All right, so those are all the embellishments that we made today. I hope you enjoyed that. Next week, I don't know what I'll have. It might be scrap organization. It might be 3 more embellishment tutorials, or I might start in on the junk journal, or maybe something completely different because I'm prepping for a craft show. So who knows? Join us next week and find out. All right, have a good week, and don't forget to go enter the giveaway. I will announce a winner via reel on October 11th. Bye.